Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this Indigenous Languages and Media Seminar titled 30 Years of Democracy, Reflections on Linguistic Diversity in the News Media Sector in South Africa. My name is Sisanda Nkwala, and I am a member of the South African National Editors Forum Council, and I'm going to be your program director this morning. I am going to be joined, and the other speakers and panelists, by Alva Boyce, as well as Pumza Sikumba as sign language interpreters for us this morning. The inaugural Indigenous Languages Seminar that was held last year, for those that attended, really provided us with an opportunity to reflect on the fact that more needs to be done when it comes to achieving the key objectives of elevating Indigenous languages in the South African media landscape. Colleagues will remember that during last year's seminars, we really debated the issues, we looked at the risks of a failure to promote Indigenous languages in the media, and there was also identification of the dangers of a potential loss of cultural heritage and identity if media do not elevate our Indigenous languages. So what has happened in the past year? What has been achieved? What are the next steps to be identified for achieving the set of objectives? And how best can they be implemented? That is what we are about this morning. And without really wasting any further time, I would like to open up to Nwabisa Makunga, who is the South African National Editors Forum chairperson, to give us the opening remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. You all look so subdued this morning, as though we're not coming to have a conversation about something so interesting. Molweni. Molweni, guys. It is such a privilege for me to be here to open the second Indigenous Languages and Media Seminar. I'd like to acknowledge the leadership of SANEF that is here, our veterans. I know many of them don't want to be called veterans. Our veterans, members of our council, and of course, media colleagues across the industry. I'd like to also welcome and thank all our partners who've made this event possible, and in particular, United Nations South Africa, as well as the PEN South African Language Board. Colleagues, last year, as Sisanda says, that in our inaugural seminar, not only did it prove to be a major success, but it was also a constructive platform for us to engage on the role of the media in promoting and preserving our Indigenous languages. Importantly, that event and that gathering highlighted the work that all of us have to do to achieve this goal, in particular to create an inclusive society. There is no greater time to recognize, develop, and invest in the nurturing of our Indigenous languages than this period. Our 30th year of our democracy provides us with an opportunity for us to truly reflect on the journey that we have traveled, and importantly, to critique our own commitment in creating this inclusive society. Language, colleagues, remains a very important metric for which we must measure our commitment to this. As the South African National Editors Forum, we recognize that the role of the media in creating public interest or promoting public interest journalism, we play a crucial one, in particular when we center languages in the preservation of this craft of ours. Allow me perhaps to highlight just a few initiatives that demonstrate our commitment to this work. Many of you may recall last year that Prof. Salau addressed the inaugural seminar, and one of the things that became quite evident in those deliberations was that there was or is a skills gap as far as practicing journalism in our African languages. This is both in text and broadcast media. So since then, Prof. Salau has worked with SANEF to explore the the possibility of designing masterclasses or short courses to help address this challenge. I'm pleased, colleagues, to announce that last month, the Northwest University Senate approved the academic program to provide training to journalists in this regard. The Journalism School is currently working with SANEF's Education and Training Subcommittee to develop the course material. And we plan to launch this program with all of your support early next year. I want to thank again the people who really were or are involved in this work, and we absolutely look forward to it. We recognize it as a giant leap in what we need to do in order for us to produce credible journalism in the multiple languages that we have. Colleagues, also you may have heard us talk quite often about establishing a journalism sustainability fund, which we are working to get off the ground. I think Sbu and I are constantly thinking about this and trying to ensure that, in a matter of months or so, it is something that, we can actually point to and say this is a legacy project of this organization. Finally, colleagues, please allow me again to welcome all of you. And I know, although I wasn't present at the seminar last year, I pretty much read up, on all that had happened. The deliberations were quite robust. They were quite in-depth. And I hope that this year too, when we use up this day to actually have such constructive conversations about how do we take this work forward, how do we ensure that we create an inclusive society and that the media industry, pretty much at the center of such conversation, is transformed practically and in the most expressive way. We trust that this engagement will be fruitful and provide the building block on which all of us ought to drive our transformation agenda. Thank you very much.
We are really pleased to have the head of office for the UN in South Africa, Dr. Kifilwe Masiteng, who is going to be addressing us next on the UN role and impact on campaigns and efforts of saving indigenous languages around the world and what lessons the entity has learned. So, Dr. Kifilwe, we welcome you to the stage to give your address.
We must seize this moment to reinforce our commitment to linguistic diversity and take concrete actions to protect, to promote, and to preserve our linguistic heritage. We must acknowledge all the intersections of linguistic diversity with the broader rights of the people of the African descent, indigenous peoples, who have faced systematic marginalization and discrimination. The United Nations has emphasized the need to address these injustices, to promote the rights of these communities, with linguistic rights being a crucial aspect of the struggle that we are all part of. To safeguard and promote indigenous languages, a multifaceted approach, whole of society approach, involving government, civil society, media organization, and the private sector is a necessity. This includes investing in language education, training media professionals, and leveraging the technology for language preservation and revitalization. Your commitment to the promotion and preservation of the indigenous languages is truly commendable, and we can only wish we can do better from here onwards. We shall be able to say today is better than yesterday, and definitely tomorrow will be better than today. Let us continue to collaborate, innovate, work together, inspire each other as we strive for a future where linguistic diversity is cherished and celebrated, but more importantly, preserved. I thank you.
And what I wanted to do was just really zoom in on one or two of the milestones on the roadmap. So the first one is about strengthening partnerships with networks and even language research networks. And I think that's why we are pleased to be here today, because the relationship between ourselves and the media become very important, as much as, there are all these arm lengths between yourselves and ourselves. which enable you to be objective. We also believe that we are actually in partnerships with each other. And because of these partnerships, we've been working with different organizations, different entities, also to really review and look at what we have accomplished in the last 30 years of this country in terms of the language dispensation and also the implementation of language policies. So it would be interesting for us to hear how far you think we have come. I mean, there's already some criticism of government that indicates that to date, the country does not have one common national language framework beyond what is said in the Constitution.
Today we contemplate not only the past 3 decades of democracy and the freedoms we now enjoy, but also engage in introspection in a society with a constitutional democracy and pondering on the question, have we taken satisfactory measures to ensure equal respect for indigenous languages? We've heard speakers talk earlier on about the decline and the fact that we need to find a way to harmonize and increase the use, the equitable use of indigenous languages. Internationally, every 3 months we're actually losing a language. And it becomes incumbent upon the social compacting that we do in the country, and it had been mentioned earlier, that the Fourth Estate plays a key role, the private, the public sector plays a key role, and civil partners, including community, all have got to play an embedded role as we seek to develop these languages. Ladies and gentlemen, the significance of safeguarding and promoting indigenous languages within our society cannot be overstated. Language serves not only as a means of communication, but also embodies a fundamental aspect of our identity, culture, and heritage. We're moving into the digital age very rapidly, an age of information and disinformation, and the role that media can play is absolutely essential as we try to not only stymie some of the negative aspects, but we ensure that we develop these indigenous languages on the back of what can happen with those outcomes. Our Constitution imposes a responsibility on the state, as well as society at large, to implement practical and positive measures to elevate the status of previously marginalized indigenous languages.
Media should be a tool for promoting African indigenous languages or South African indigenous languages. And we have seen that in a couple of cases in media, particularly because the aim is to reach a particular audience. And it is prudent that as you communicate to the people, you communicate in a language they understand. I may not be correct in this quote, but I think Nelson Mandela said that if you speak to somebody in a language they understand, it goes to, where does it go? To the mind. And if you speak to them in their language, it goes to the heart.
With the people that are sitting here, we'll be talking about that. About what can we do to ensure that our languages, our cultures, and who we are is preserved.
When I listen to us talking about indigenous languages, the feeling I get is that we seem to be talking about some languages that are spoken by some strange people somewhere. Whereas in actual fact in South Africa, about 80% of the population is indigenous.
Although we often talk about language or the need to promote language as a cultural imperative or a social and developmental imperative, I would like to posit that actually the development of indigenous languages and all languages, in fact, is in media is a commercial imperative. In other words, for me to be able to have a radio station, a newspaper, a television station, I will need to have the resources I will have to be able to pay salaries. I will have to have the infrastructure. I will have to have the capacity to print and distribute the newspaper if it's a newspaper. Without that commercial basis for that endeavor, you will not have media.
As I was listening to how we are promised that the media is there, the newspapers are there, television is there, that's where now I have to come in. I'm glad you raised this question. With regards to the content, I would say it's only partially covered. Why am I saying this? If only the media that we are talking about has covered the content as per our syllabus, then we'll be the happiest. Now we go to this artificial intelligence. Wow. Wow. It is now stealing our critical thinking as human beings, particularly in the African languages. We no longer think in Xitsonga, we no longer think in Sepedi, we no longer think we can name all the African languages because we dwell much into looking for information from it and we come and present about it as if it is our own thinking.
My name is Atengosi Nzobe. I'm from TUT. I'm a student there doing second year in communications and advertising and marketing as my selective. So I'd like to thank each and everyone who made this platform possible, especially SUNF and PENSLOP, sorry about that, and the affiliated organizations who made this possible.
A student at the Tshwane University of Technology. I'm a former CSRC chairperson of a selective party. I'm standing up on a plea to the panel there to say that I really wish we could involve most organizations which are here with and integrate with the institution to create awareness, to create awareness on the importance of indigenous language and in selective courses that specialize in the profession of language, communication and everything.
We need to overhaul the system and how we do things if we're really going to see some fruits in implementing these languages. Otherwise, like you rightly said, say, we are going to have these talks and continuously say, we're not getting there, we're not getting there. But we ourselves are not using these languages. We ourselves are not. I mean, Afrikaans people have got 3 cake net channels. We don't have a channel yasiZulu, Xitsonga, or anything. So I appreciate what the panelist says, but I would like us to have these talks in terms of how are we overhauling the systems and putting these languages in the fiber of everything that we do so that we create a need for people to know these languages. It's not just a by the way. Thank you.
I sit as the Treasurer General of SUNF. Mine is not a comment. I think I just want to pick up from where Bramike left off. The reality is that, yes, Bramike, we do have these conversations and it becomes a conversation ad nauseum. But the reality is that I think there's 2 things that need to happen. We still need to have these conversations so that we can get to that point where we have tangible outcomes. But I think what would be important coming from this discussion is what are these action points that are tangible that we can do individually as organizations, but also collectively.
But I want to add another point on the regulatory bodies, whether they've got enough teeth to enforce the quotas that are supposed to be experienced when we talk about issues of language, because I don't see that happening. And I think it's an area that we need to look at, whether the regulatory bodies are playing the part that they're supposed to, ICASA being one of them, obviously. The second one is the fact that in the room, there's so much young people, youth. And I think what Dr. Majola said is when you talk to people, we've got to be inclusive and talk to them, meet them where they are. And I think going forward, next year, like Bramike is saying, it will add more value to have, as part of your panel, some youth sitting as part of the channel so that they can speak their mind.
And why are we sitting here intimidated by AI when some of us were born into AI? So how is it that it's a new thing when it's this old, from the 1950s? The work that was done by John McCarthy, Alan Turing, and many others who were involved in that project at the time. But how is it that it is so new that we are scared of it? So this is a conversation that we are going to have this afternoon.
What are we fighting for then? Right? And that's the big part here. We are our biggest enemies. The way that we look at systems, from individualism, from thinking about what we can get, as opposed to actually centering the languages themselves. The languages are not centered. I'm sorry, I've gone, that's long sailed. That when people say, no, we really care about the languages, I say, well, I can give you 10 examples where it really shows that you don't care about the languages. It's about where I am, what I can get, how I can progress. Not about the languages. We are lying. Right, so when we put AI and digital and whatever, that's just the destruction. So that's the thing I wanted to say. The other one is that, yes, there is a part that for a while, what I'd call it is the question of who pays for the internet is a central thing about digital things. So 25 years ago, which is 1998, Google was there, but then there'd been other search engines before. Google is just one. And during that period, there was this part that you typically had to have your own website, pay for it, and then create content on it. And then something changed when you got into the 2000s, where online, the content almost is free. You can just go get it. And then the way that we said that things were going to be paid for was through advertising. And the media landscape got caught up in that, right? You would have a news website, the news website would advertise on a thing, and then you would then get back money through people visiting your website. As time went on, it seemed that the search engines had more power than the media itself. They rake in most of the money that comes from this advertising, and the media is not getting as much. Because you see this by the newsrooms dwindling, because the funding generally gets less and less because print is going away, because people are expecting that I'll be able to read online for free. And now it puts you in this vicious cycle. If you don't have a website and you just have print, can you survive? Right? And now if you have only online that's completely open, can you survive? No.
Reflecting on what Professor said, I think that the challenge is not so much that people are looking for prestige. It is also the reality of bread and butter issues, which I think you also confirmed when you spoke about the fact that you're still trying to figure out how to best work with Dunisani, because the thing is maybe from an R&D point of view, you would have sourced funding to support your research for whatever period, but as a publisher, I am producing this content and it needs to make business sense.
Because I think, some of the work that we are doing, we are trying to give life, to these African languages. How do we do that? We do that through trying to democratize, science, to make science much more accessible to the citizens of this country. We do that, through working very closely with the media in South Africa, in terms of for them, to publish, science stories in indigenous languages.
And I have covered the tremor story. It was both in English and isiNdebele. In English, it wasn't difficult. I flowed. But when it comes to isiNdebele, it was really hard because I needed to reach out the people at home. I needed to make sure that your elderly people at home are with me. They're with me through the journey of telling this tremor story. They need to understand as to what causes tremor. And if I don't understand what causes tremor, how do I expect an elderly person at home to understand what is trema. How do I expect an elderly person at home to know the terms that I use? The elderly person can listen to Lotus FM and not understand a word that I say. But when they tune into Ikokwezi FM or Ukozi FM, they would understand, oh, Nontlantla was talking about this and this and that, because I broke each and every word in my language. And so indigenous reporting, indigenous language is very important to us.
Thank you for joining us and thank you for staying with us. I'm Diane Hawker. I am joined by these esteemed gentlemen this afternoon. I'm not going to go into too much detail about their background because they are going to be doing their own presentations.
SANEF launched a solution to this problem of traditional media in South Africa not moving with the times, because the audience is migrating to digital devices. It's not to say that there's no space for print media. There is space for print media because it's tangible, it's readable, it can be used as research, papers in schools, it's newspapers as an example. So this digitization drive really was not just about building a website for publishers or radio broadcasters or community television. It's really about deep diving into their businesses and giving them the necessary strategies, the workflows, because it's all about sustainability. And training is part and parcel of that as well, in terms of skills transfer. So we focused on that as a brief, and we said, how are we going to do this? Look, I've been doing it for the Caxton Group. I've digitized the Caxton Group since 2010 until my tenure was about 11 years. And we managed to do this for about 75, 76 publications across the country. So we know what we're doing when we do these things. And we thought to ourselves, this should be a walk in the park. But then we didn't realize the fact that these are independently owned community newspapers, community radio, and community televisions. And like the bread and butter is depending on them. It's not depending on shareholders and the Caxton Group, for example, being on the stock exchange. You see, so we said to ourselves, we need to implement something that's not going to be disruptive to their operation, because that is their bread and butter. And we also needed to apply some change management within them, because some of them are two-man shows, some of them have got 4 people, some of them have got volunteers who churn out every single year. Therefore, how are we going to do this? So our approach was very easy to figure out. We said, let's start small with a pilot. All right, I can see one of the pilot partners, Mr. Monwabisi from Ikwezi, is also here today. So we took a group and we said, let's test these things out and just make sure that we find what the problems are, we find solutions for those problems, so that when we scale onto the second phase, then we know we don't replicate the same problem. Sounds very simple. Then we didn't stop there. We said, no, let's also look at how we can make things sustainable. Because at the end of the day, you can't have a project that starts and ends, and then things just fall off. So we decided to establish something called Community Media Support Services.
The first thing maybe to look at when we're talking about African languages, let's look at Tanzania. Tanzania has one official language, and that language is Kiswahili. It's not Kiswahili and English. It's Kiswahili only. And when you arrive in Tanzania, like me, you're looking for your English language newspaper, you have to walk through Dar es Salaam for a long time before you find an English language newspaper, because 99% of all their publications are in Kiswahili. So it's not like it can't be done. Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere did it in Tanzania, fostered respect for African things, including the language and the culture. And today, Tanzania is one of those countries where you don't expect to find people fighting about whether they are Shangan and what are you doing in my space when you are a vendor. You can't find that in Tanzania, because the creation of that one language that molded everybody together produced a nation that is one in both language, culture, and commitment to the country itself. So it can be done.
We just want to find out or get a sense from all participants today, just 3 main things that you think we should take forward to the next seminar next year. If we could get that. We've been taking notes, we're going to be going through them. There were resolutions that were proposed, there were kind of requests made, but we just want to make sure that if you didn't get a chance, you might just say, guys, for me to come back next year here, I would like to see this topic being addressed. Let's start with that one. Yeah. We have only 5 minutes. If we don't do it now, we're not going to be doing it.
Thanks. I actually don't want us to come back here. I want us to go to a place where the people who we are talking about, the people who speak the different languages are actually located. Sandton is nice. I mean, the food here is fantastic, but why are we here? You know, like we should be somewhere where the people who this conversation impacts most directly will be able to actually engage with us from the user perspective, because we are not necessarily the users in the conversation, the only users. There are other users as well, the audience from the media perspective, from Pansal's perspective, the people that they are trying to preserve the language for, and they are missing in this conversation.
I just want to hear when is SANEF going to see President Ramaphosa, you know, about supporting community newspapers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm from the Khoi and San communities. I work for PAN, South African Language Board. So yeah, I would also love the inclusion for Khoi and San languages in all media platforms. I know obviously we are talking about indigenous languages, which is good. We are preserving them, we are promoting them, and we're also protecting them. But the Khoi and San communities in South Africa have lost out on the use of their languages because they were imposed to speak Afrikaans, obviously. So now I'm appointed by PAN South African Language Board as the fluent speaker to assist and promote the Khoi and San languages within South Africa nationally. So I would definitely also need hands, because PANSALB is trying, but we would also need other partners like Education, Department of Arts and Culture, SABC, all those stakeholders can also come on board so that we can assist, because to be honest, they want to speak, mostly the people want to speak their language that they have lost out, and they're not privileged like I am. So we have to assist them also to make use of their language, because you can only promote a language that is being used. And what's the best way to use a language is to promote it through different platforms. I always tell people when they're asking me, what language do you speak? The first thing I tell them is, have you watched the movie called The Gods Must Be Crazy? The moment I tell them that, they say, oh, that language, that. I said, yes. So they must have watched that movie to recognize and know about that language. So how can Khoi and San languages also be brought to the platform like other languages? It's through media. And that's the lack that we have. And luckily, PANSALB has done great, that I'm on board, and we are working towards that goal. But I would also want more partners in that.
I think next year try and get the agencies to come here so that they can redefine the SEMs or the LSMs in a way that BMW can advertise in the community newspapers and not see BMW as a car that gets stolen in the townships the way it was put earlier on. So I think that will help, but more importantly, we need to get the GCIS to come and explain where the numbers are. Someone explained it today, that the numbers are with Highveld, whereas we've got indigenous language radio stations that have more numbers than your Highveld kind of studio. So we need Highveld, rather GCIS and the agencies which need to be transformed themselves to also come here.
My name is Tabiso Mtetwa. I'd like to greet you all. I am from the University of TUT. Tshwane University of Technology. I'm studying communication, majoring in public relations. I can say that in this event I have learned a lot about the importance of indigenous languages. And as a youth, I think this program should not just end here or happen once a year. Maybe there should be more outreach in the institutions, get trying to get the youth involved in this program, because we need to understand the importance of languages. Because, for example, I am Zulu. I'm from KZN. I didn't know where I lived in a society where there's only one language. And I recently came to Gauteng, whereby I learned about multicultural languages. So, and now, since I've learned about this program, I think now I understand the importance of self-identity and representation of media in language context. I wish for this program to continue, not only once a year, but so like for example, the Northwest University programs, to also come to the TUT to inform us, get the youth involved in this program. That is my point. Thank you.
So I want to thank you so much for being here and for the guidance that you've given us in terms of us planning for next year, the pointers that you showed us. And indeed, ladies and gentlemen, we want to appreciate your presence here, particularly the students. We appreciate your input, all of you. And we hope that by next year, some of you probably are doing third year, so you might be even considering your honors, looking at some of the concepts that have been discussed here and taking us forward. Probably the solution will rest with you, because you'll be starting your own businesses in the near future, and you will venture to try them and looking at and testing the market of our indigenous languages. Thank you so much for all of you.